The Surf Line was once described as the Santa Fe's northeast corridor for most of the 20th century. Multiple trains between Los Angeles and San Diego would run within the ATSF's San Diegans between the aforementioned cities. The trains ran at an operating speed of 90 miles per hour, and several trains ran on the Surf Line. Starting on May 21st, 1952, 2 RDCs built for the Santa Fe were added to the system and would make 2 daily round trips. These RDCs were DC-191 and DC-192. Both were built that year, with DC-191 being the first delivered on April 28th, and the pair would be used on trains 80, 81, 82, and 83. They were praised for their speed, but they were often overcrowded and had inexperienced crew that would shoot past stations. Not to mention, they had poor braking. And 4 years after their service began, the pair would be involved in what would become the worst rail accident in Los Angeles history by death toll. The date is January 22nd, 1956. DC-191 and DC-192 are leaving Los Angeles Union Station as Train 82, with 61-year-old Frank Parrish as the engineer that day. He was experienced on the Surf Line, but this was only his second trip on the RDCs. DC-191 was leading, while DC-192 trailed behind. The train is scheduled to depart at 5:40 p.m., fully loaded. The train departed the terminal at that time. Usually, the train would pass by a junction, Redondo Junction. It would take usually 6 minutes to make it to Redondo Junction, but Train 82 only made it 2 minutes, doing 69 miles per hour. Unfortunately, the curve was only 15.
Is derailed and overturned on a curve. Minute speed in the curve is blamed for the disaster. The engineer, a veteran of the line, said he was...
The RDC duo flipped on their side at 5:42 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time, doing 69 miles per hour. The RDCs then skidded another few hundred feet before stopping. A signalman saw the train round the corner and derail in a shower of sparks. As calls about the emergency started flooding in, the media came in after an hour and broadcast the accident. Movie studios even donated floodlights to help rescue the dead and injured. In the accident, 30 people would end up dying, and 117 were injured. The accident was the worst in Los Angeles history, surpassing even the modern-day Chatsworth head-on train collision that killed 25. People were all wondering on what on earth caused this accident to unfold. So, what was it? Well, Engineer Parrish was skilled as stated earlier, but what wasn't mentioned is that he had a medical condition, one that caused him to undergo blackouts. No charges were brought onto Parrish due to him admitting sole responsibility for the accident, saying he underwent a blackout before the accident, which would explain on why the train stayed doing 69 miles per hour with no brake application. Parrish would later take early retirement from the railroad and never ran a train again. As for the RDCs involved in the wreck, both would be repaired in the ATSF Topeka shops after the accident, where DC-192 underwent a rebuild to an RDC-2, adding a baggage compartment in expense for more than half of its seats, but they wouldn't return to California. Instead, they would both end up in service on trains 311 and 312 between Newton and Dodge City, Kansas. After the service was canceled in June 1965, they were transferred into service on the El Pasoan trains as trains 13 and 14 between Albuquerque, New Mexico and El Paso, Texas. Once that service underwent closure in April 1968, the rail cars were restored, and DC-192 would likely be eventually scrapped. In February of 1970, DC-191 would end up being purchased by the Baltimore and Ohio, being renumbered to 9918, and was used between Pittsburgh and Versailles, Pennsylvania. However, it would undergo another derailment on December 30th, 1976, while being leased by PA Train, when a group of vandals let 4 RECs run away. They ran for 7 miles before slamming into a Pittsburgh and Lake Erie freight train, destroying the 2 lead cars but letting 9918 escape damage. In 1980, PA Train returned to 9918 and the other intact RECs to the Baltimore and Ohio, who then sold them to the Maryland Department of Transportation for MARC commuter rail service, where it was numbered to simply 18. It served MARC until retirement in 1993 and was used as a parts source, but it would then be purchased in 1995 by Caston Railcar Services. 18 will then later return home to California after the later Illinois Transit Assembly Corporation traded with the Pacific Railroad Society of San Dimas, California, where it's currently being restored to its former ATSF identity as of 2009. It's been 66 years since this accident, and today, the surf line that was once run by the ATSF is now run by Metrolink, Amtrak, and Coaster, all with technology that will be able to stop accidents like this from happening again. But that doesn't mean that we should ignore the red flags that led to this.